League of Legends just got their biggest item change update since the release of the mythic item system. Knowing what to build is now more important than ever. We have season 13 and the game is mostly balanced around items and not so much around champions. A bad champion can carry with good items, but a good champion cannot carry with bad items. So you have to know what to buy and when to buy it. But do not worry guys, I got you covered. I'm Pusi Crew, I'm a multi-season challenger Rengar one trick on the EOS and the Korean server. And I spent the last years and especially the last weeks on the PBE server experimenting and theory crafting the best builds for Rengar for the upcoming patches. Rengar now has more viable item paths and item builds than ever, and you have so many options to choose from. I tried everything, played 100 of games and found the best items and builds that you have to abuse to stomp everyone that is trying to stop you. In the following part, I'm going to explain you every viable item and when you have to buy it. Take out your notepads guys and enjoy the show. Let's get started with the most important items in the game, the mythic items. Assassin mythic items got a huge change. For example, Duskblade doesn't give you stealth anymore, but it makes you untargetable for 1.5 seconds instead, and abilities deal up to an additional 15% damage based on the target's missing health. And Prowler now is no longer a mythic item, the dash is removed, and now instead it got the old Duskblade passive, which makes your auto attack deal bonus damage and slows the enemy for 99% for 0.5 seconds after dashing or exiting stealth. And the most exciting part about the mythic changes is Youmuu's is now a mythic item guys. You heard me right, Youmuu's Ghostblade is now a mythic item. I can't wait. Its stats is increased and you gain movement speed and lethality out of combat, which stacks up until you hit someone. It's basically like an AD version of Deadman's Blade. Also, that Infinity Edge got changed, which was one of Rengar's most favorite items in the entire game. Infinity Edge is now a mythic item as well. And then there's Eclipse. Eclipse basically just stays the same, nothing changes. And with that being said, this was a quick TLDR of the new mythic item changes. So what mythic items are going to be viable on Rengar? You might think Duskblade looks insane now that you become untargetable for 1.5 seconds after killing someone. But sadly, this is not the case guys. It's not as impactful as you might think. Invisibility is overall better because it allows you to reposition without the enemy team knowing. Also, the untargetability has a 10-second cooldown, so you can only get it once per teamfight, unless the fight is super extended. But what is even worse is that the Duskblade passive, which makes your abilities deal up to 15% damage based on the target's missing health, does not count for Rengar's Q, because Rengar Q counts as an auto attack and doesn't benefit at all from this, which makes the item basically completely unviable for Rengar. So yeah guys, sadly we all have to say goodbye to Duskblade. It was a nice run Duskblade, but we have to move on now. Rest in peace. As well as Duskblade, also Infinity Edge is not viable at all on Rengar. It's a super bad spike for Rengar and doesn't provide him anything. Not even the damage is good, since you need crit items before AE has any value. So guys, since it's a mythic item, you can't go at like 5th or 6th item anymore. So we have to say also goodbye to IE. Let's appreciate everything that Infinity Edge and Duskblade has done for us, but it's time to let go guys. Goodbye forever. But guys, there's no reason to be sad. We got something even better. Youmuu's Ghostblade might be the best item we could ever get for Rengar. The movement speed and the damage feels insane on him. Your snowball potential is on a whole nother level and your pick potential on the map is crazy good. This is going to be the go-to item on Rengar almost every game, especially if you play against a lot of squishies and not so many tanks. So guys, make sure to abuse Youmuu's into squishy comps or when you're really fat in the early game to snowball the game into an easy 20-minute victory. Let's also not forget about Eclipse. Eclipse is still here for us, it is still a viable item, it will remain the same as before. You got Eclipse whenever you face bruiser or tanky comps. Eclipse is amazing when it comes to pure damage while also having decent sustain with the shield. It gives you the extra damage that you need to kill those bruiser champions and tanky champions. Or if the enemy ADC is very hard to kill because he's getting a lot of shields and a lot of heals from his support. With Eclipse you are also way stronger in 1v1 scenarios and invades, and it allows you to kill champions you would usually struggle with fairly easy. So whenever the enemy has 2 or more bruisers or tanks, you gotta go Eclipse guys. Not even Youmuu's is gonna save you. But anything else than that, go Yuma's Ghostblade. It's the perfect item for Rengar. Also, a very niche item is Divine Thunderer. If the enemy has 3 or more tanks, and I'm talking about like really tanky champions and really unplayable comps, like for example Poppy top lane, Nautilus support, Galio mid lane, all in the same team, where you usually would find it impossible to have any impact. In those games especially, you have to go Divine Thunderer. This item actually allows you to play the game and deal decent damage to tanks. You can do a lot of work in teamfights and tank a lot of damage. So make sure to abuse Divine Thunderer whenever the comp allows you to. Alrighty, so now that you know when to go which mythic item, it's time to discuss each situational legendary item. Before we get started, Rengar has 2 legendary items that are absolutely core, that you need in every game. You have to get them every single game, there are only a few exceptions. And those are Essence Reaver and Lord Dominik's Regard. Rengar still remains a crit champion. Crit simply has most value on Rengar, and those 2 items are the perfect ones for him to use. Essence Reaver for the damage and the snowball potential thanks to its ability haste, and LDR for the extra damage and the armor pen, plus the Giant Slayer passive that you need to assassinate any target in the game. But apart from those 2 items, the new item changes gave Rengar insanely good legendary items to choose from. Now more than ever. There are multiple items Rengar has to go in certain games, in order to make it easier to play the game for him. It is very important that you analyze the enemy team comp and adapt. The keyword here is adapting. He has a lot of different viable builds and items you can go. Starting off with one of the most insane items Rengar can now go. Our lost son, Prowler's Claw. Now that Prowler's Claw is a legendary item, with a changed passive, it's insanely good to go on Rengar. The stats overall are very good, and the passive makes it super easy to catch people, especially champions with a lot of mobility. Rengar can use the 99% slow on every leap he does and every ult. This has so crazy value for him. If the enemy team is very squishy but has a few dashes, you have to go Prowler's Claw as your second or third item. It makes sure you get secured picks and the enemy team doesn't have that much counterplay. Next up is what most people probably know as the most useless item in the game, Collector. But Collector's stats just got recently buffed and it is actually now viable on Rengar. If the enemy team doesn't have armor and is fairly squishy, you can go Collector 3rd or 4th item for extra pick potential and way easier one-shots. If they do have armor, you gotta go Lord Dominik Regard instead though. So make sure to analyze the enemy team comp, and if they have no armor, Collector is a super good item now to go. It has a very good snowball potential and the damage now is actually very insane. And the next legendary item that got viable for Rengar is Stormrazor. Stormrazor's energized attack now applies 25 plus 65% AD and 50% bonus magic damage. Since Rengar's passive gives him an insane amount of bonus AD, the energized attack from Stormrazor will deal insane damage late game. So make sure to get Stormrazor as your last item or sell your boots for it if you need the extra damage to finish off your enemy. The attack speed also feels super nice and makes you super strong in skirmishes where you can abuse bushes. And the last legendary item that just got changed and looks super good on Rengar is Bloodthirster. I mean, Bloodthirster was already an insane item before the changes, right? But now it gives you 10 to 40 bonus AD if you got more than 50% HP, and also got 18% lifesteal instead of 15 now. These are actually very good buffs and Rengar needs the bonus AD and the bonus lifesteal. Bloodthirster will give you an insane damage spike and also will give you super good sustain for late game teamfights. You have to go Bloodthirster after your core items as your last item or sell your boots for it if you need the sustain combined with the extra damage. This is good when you have to play extended teamfights and kill more than just the backline. And Bloodthirster in your build also allows you to 1v1 bruisers and tanks because of the extra lifesteal that you get. And now moving on to the unchanged legendary items. The first one I'm going to talk about is Ravenous Hydra, which is to this day probably still the most discussed item for Rengar. When do I go Hydra? I go Hydra when I need to play side lane and I'm either the only fat member in my team or really fat in general. But I don't buy it first or second item. Hydra is way too expensive to buy that early into the game and you lose way too much damage. I always buy Hydra as my 4th item, sometimes as my 3rd item if I have a lot of gold. You need to buy Hydra later in the game because, like I said, it's too expensive and you lose too much damage. But also, it needs way too long to fully stack if you only clear your own jungle camps, which is the case in the early game. It gets a lot easier once you can go on the sideline and clear the minions. And how do you know if you should go sideline or not? If your team is sieging and you don't have two sideliners, you have to be the one sieging and going on side, because you have to perma pressure. Rengar can't siege and can't defend the siege. If the enemy team is grouping, you cannot defend it. So you have to go on the sideline and absorb the pressure from there. Either you shred all their turrets or they answer your push, and you can rotate after that to your team with your ultimate. So make sure to check the state of the game and then decide if you need to go sideline or not. Hydra is so insane for that. But you can also go it if you can't really get into the enemy backline and they have a lot of melee champions who are frontline. Hydra helps you to deal a lot of AoE damage in those teamfights. Okay, now that you know when to buy Hydra, let's move on to one of my favorite items in the entire game, which is Serpent's Fang. Serpent's Fang is by far the most underrated legendary item in the entire game. It is so cheap and the spike you get from it is so insane. I always go Serpent's Fang the moment I see that the enemy team has a lot of shields due to Karma, Janna, Shield Bow or whatever it is. It is so useful and it is way too efficient not to buy. I always go Serpent's Fang second item. You need your mythic item first so you have a good early spike, and then very soon after your first item you can already buy Serpent's Fang because it is so cheap. It's such an amazing item. Make sure to buy it whenever they have shield, guys. And next up is Edge of Night. Edge of Night is a must buy against high CC comps and champions that can cancel your jump, like for example Lulu, Janna, Thresh, Rek'Sai and so on. It gives you decent durability due to its HP, and the shield just secures so you can go into the backline. So when in my build do I go Edge of Night? Edge of Night has really bad stats in general. You lack a lot of damage if you got very early into the game. I always go my mythic item first, then Essence Reaver or Serpent's Fang or Prowler's Claw to have secured damage first, and then I go Edge of Night third or fourth item. Going this item too early will just take away too much damage, and that early into the game you can play around the enemy CC anyway. You need it to engage into the backline later when the enemy team is grouped. That's where the item really shines. Okay guys, those are the main situational assassin items you can go on Rengar. So let's move on to the defensive items. In general guys, it is very smart to invest into defensive items if you are really ahead. This is what I preach and teach during all my coachings and all my live streams. Think about it this way guys. The only way you lose the game if you are really fat is if you die. So make sure not to die by getting defensive items. If you are already one item ahead of everyone in the game, you're strong enough and you usually don't need more damage. So invest the extra gold that you have into defensive items not to die and not to throw away your lead or give away your shutdown. This is a very important concept that you need to understand. It will win you so many more games, trust me. Especially as an assassin. It is very important not to throw away your lead and always keep up your tempo. Defensive items are perfect for that. And one of my favorite defensive items is Maw of Mortius. This item is so broken in general and so underrated on Rengar. Since the shield scales with AD and since Rengar's passive gives him bonus AD, it is way too good not to go on Rengar. You have to buy Maw against heavy AP comps. If you see the enemy team has at least 2 AP assassins or 2 fat AP members, you can go at almost every game. You can go Maw of Mortius third item in almost every game. Why third and not second? Well, basically same principle as with Edge of Night. You lose way too much damage if you go to second item. So you rather want your second item be Essence Reaver, Serpent's Fang or Prowler's Claw. And then get Maw of Mortius third item to get an extra amount of durability. The next defensive item is Death's Dance. Death's Dance has basically the same principle as Maw of Mortius. The healing from Death's Dance scales with AD. So every time you kill someone, you heal for an insane amount on Rengar because of his passive. But when I build Death's Dance, it's a little bit different. The only time I got Death's Dance third item is if the enemy team is really AD heavy and has an AD assassin somewhere, or the enemy ADC is very fat. This item is really expensive, so if you go at third item, you lose a lot of damage, but the sustain you get is insane. So again, only go this early into very AD heavy comps. Usually I go Death's Dance either 5th item or as my last item and sell my boots for it, to get the extra durability and extra healing in the lane game teamfights. Because if you're already 5 or 6 items in the game, you have way more AD and Death's Dance has way more value. So whenever you're really fat and you don't want to lose your lead, make sure to get a Death's Dance guys. It is a very OP item. but don't get it too early unless they're full AD. And the last defensive assassin item that you can go is Black Cleaver. I very rarely go Black Cleaver with my assassin builds, since it ruins the Giant Slayer passive from LDR. If you don't know what the Giant Slayer passive does, it basically gives you more damage if the enemy team has more HP than you. But in some games, I actually like to get Black Cleaver as a third item, if I feel like I need pure HP, because otherwise I just get one-shot by the enemy assassins. And the ability it has is super insane for teamfights, and it also gives you very solid tanky stats in general. I usually build it with Eclipse for extra sustain, so I can play extended teamfights very easily, while also shredding the enemy team's armor. Okay my friends, now that you know when to go which mythic item and which legendary item, I will tell you my favorite builds with each mythic item. Starting off with Yumus. The first build that I call the Backline Slayer consists of Yumus Ghostblade first item into Serpent's Fang if they have a lot of shields, if not Prowler's Claw second item, into Essence Reaver third item, then I will go Lord Dominic's Regard as my fourth item. As my fifth item I will go Collector for even more pick potential. And then as my sixth item I will sell my boots for either a Bloodthirster if I need more sustain in teamfights, but if I need extra damage and even more pick potential, I will go Stormrazor as my last item. The next Yumus build that I really love is the 1v5 Sidelane Machine. I start with the Yumus, I will go Essence Reaver as my second item, into LDR third item, then as my fourth item I will go Ravenous Hydra for sideline potential and even better wave clear. Then as my fifth item I will get Death Stance for the extra sustain, and then as my last item I will sell my boots for a Bloodthirster for even more sustain. With this build you can just perma pressure sideline and you have insane sustain. Now that you know my two favorite Yumus builds, let's move on to the Eclipse builds. They are pretty similar guys. For example, the first build is the Glass Cannon build. I go Eclipse first item, into second item Essence Reaver, as my third item I will go LDR, as my fourth item I will go Hydra, then my fifth item I'll go Bloodthirster for even more sustain, and then last item I sell my boots for a Death Stance for even more sustain, or a Stormrazor if I need more damage. And my other favorite Eclipse build is the front to back build. In this build I will go Eclipse first item, Essence Reaver second item, more if they have a lot of magic resist third item, if not I'll go Death Stance, and then fourth item LDR, into fifth item Hydra, and then as a last item I'll get a Bloodthirster. With this build you're fairly tanky, thanks to the defensive items, which is going to be either more or Death Stance, and you have a lot of sustain thanks to Hydra and Bloodthirster. And now lastly, my favorite Divine Sundra build. I will go Divine Sundra first item, into Black Cleaver second item, then either more if they have a lot of magic resist, if not I'll go Death Stance third item, and then again either a more or a Death Stance fourth item, depending on if I bought more Death Stance earlier. And then as a fifth item I'll go GA, Guardian's Angel, and I will just keep my boots, because usually I will go Tarbis or Mercury shoes, and they have a lot of value. So guys, those are my favorite builds. But remember, I will adapt the legendary items like Edge of Night, Maw, Collector, Black Cleaver in all the builds, in every single one of them, depending on the situation. I described to you before which situation applies to which item, right? So like I said, the keyword here is adapting guys. Trust me, now that you know when to go which item, you're gonna just skyrocket the ladder. Games are gonna be way easier, the items are gonna benefit you so much more. I hope you enjoyed this video guys. That's it for the Season 13 Rengar item guide. Now that you should know what to buy in which scenario, you're ready to be the most efficient Rengar player you could ever be. Pay attention during your games, analyze the comps, and make the most out of your gold. I hope you enjoyed the video guys. If you do, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you get any questions, any at all, make sure to ask them in the comments below. I will try to answer every single one of them. Thank you for watching guys. I love you all, and peace.